Crime is commonly understood as things poor people do to each other or to rich people. If you really boil it down to what we talk about in the press and in most other circumstances in society in general, that is what is deemed crime. Or as violations of laws and or ordinances that are committed by black, brown, and poor people. And I think it's important, let that sink in, that crime is seen as violations of laws, ordinances, etc., committed by black, brown, or poor people. And there's a reason why I say that. There's a myth of what crime really is in society. And the idea in this myth is that, at least to some degree, all are equal under the law. And penalties for committing crimes are, for the most part, and people can argue even within this ideology that, okay, I know that there's some differences in how some people were treated, but overall, penalties are issued equally for crimes. But then there's what we know as the actual reality. In this reality, you see examples. Front license plates. Who gets stopped for front license plates, not having them? It's people who have shitty cars. It's people who are black or brown or who look different than what society thinks you should look like. It could even be something like you have a wild hairstyle or you're listening to Latin music. There can be many different things, but it's a front license plate. So there's a frontal view of who's in the driver's seat before there's a stop that takes place. BMW tends to not get stopped, unless it has nice flashy rims and is bumping some beats. But if you just have a regular nice BMW or a car of that level, you're not going to get stopped, versus somebody with a 98 Malibu without a front license plate. They're much more likely to be stopped. DUIs. If you're wealthy and you have a good lawyer, you can get out of a DUI. I've heard it. I've seen it. I know people who have gotten caught driving drunk, hit something, but who they know and who they are allowed them to basically skate out of the $10,000 basically that would ensue for a DUI. Versus somebody, which I have many, many examples of people who all they have is a public defender at best, and they get hell put on them. They have no license for probably years to come, because in reality they have to get to work. And we're humans. We want to do stuff. We don't want to just be cramped up in a house or have to use crappy Cincinnati public transportation. So you're going to use your vehicle if you still have it, and then you get caught without having a license, and the fines and the amount of time, the suspensions, it just keeps going, and then you get a call into court that you miss because you don't have a car. And it's life for somebody who has a DUI. It just shows that it's a law. It's not to say that a wealthy person can't get a DUI and go to jail and have everything happen to them, but it's gonna happen for sure if you're black, brown, or poor. Other violations that are related to having a bad car. A member of Black Lives Matter got stopped by the police and harassed because his muffler is jacked. If the body of your car doesn't look right, or there's pieces hanging, there's just a bunch of different ways that you can get violations. If you have a nice car, it's not going to happen to you. No insurance or lapsed insurance. That's one of the big money getters that people get caught on. You get stopped for one of these other reasons. If you're in the red category, you get stopped for one of these other reasons, and then they ask you, well, license or proof of insurance. Well, some of us can't afford that extra $100 or more, if you're younger, a month to pay for insurance. So you don't have it, and just as part of what capitalism is, because capitalism acknowledges in a roundabout way some of the messed up things about them, and they find a way to commodify them. So that's where you get your Safe Autos from and your Generals. Those are actual companies that profit from the idea that black, brown, and poor people can't afford insurance. So when you get caught by the cops, you make a quick call and get this insurance. They're acknowledging that reality and commodifying it. And we just talked about drug possession, where if you live in Glendale or Indian Hill, and I know countless examples of people who get caught doing, with some weed, or get caught something like that driving around, and the cop lets them go, says, put that stuff away, or maybe takes it from them. Maybe they'll get driven to the house of their parents if they're, if they're younger people or whatever. Again, if you're in this blue category, and we can all point out neighborhoods that are similar, where the similar blue treatment would happen to you, versus if you live in Madisonville and you get caught with some weed, or if you get caught in an area that is poor or black. I mean, if you get caught in Adams County and you're not from the wealthy areas of Adams County, which is majority white, but if you are in an area and you're poor and you get caught with drugs, you have a different reality than somebody in what's the neighborhood east of on the east on Beachmont, down Beachmont? Anderson. If you're in Anderson, it's just a different reality. And we talked about the meth versus crack, where there are programs, and I'm for them. I'm for people who have issues that arise from drug use being able to get the help and the medicine they need, and it should be free of charge. But the outrage is, of course, where was this during the crack epidemic, which the vast majority of that hit black people. But if you go up Beachmont, the place where I used to live, at the top of that hill was his nickname Heroin Hill. Well, Heroin Hill is seeping into Anderson, and that's a problem. So you just get a different response that is racialized, how crime is seen or how things like that are seen. And then you have a whole other category for these and more serious, actual harmful, destructive acts that get carried out against other people. Sentencing is heavily skewed. This is a report that came from the ACLU from 2014 that they submitted. I just want to read this. Racial disparities in sentencing in the United States. There are significant racial disparities in sentencing decisions in the United States. Sentences imposed on black males in the federal system are nearly 20% longer than those imposed by whites for similar crimes. Now, for some of us, this is such an indentured reality that we kind of just go, well, yeah, that's messed up. It's in a messed up side. But really, think about that for a minute. 20% more of some group of human beings, just because of the color of their skin, fall into a higher sentencing category. Black male federal defendants receive longer sentences than whites arrested for the same offenses and with comparable criminal histories. So even if you're somebody who, because cops as usual, when they get somebody on something, they try to pull up a rap sheet. If my rap sheet looks like Drew's rap sheet, I still might get the bigger sentence. And there's no other on paper reason except for ethnicity, BLK. You can read this and I'll go over it. LWOP means life without parole. Only about 13% of the U.S. population, blacks constitute, but 28.3% of people who get life without parole. And then, so anyway, you can just read these figures. They're highly skewed. Based on data provided by the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, by the U.S. Sentencing Commission and State Departments of Corrections, the ACLU estimates that 65.4% of prisoners serving life without parole for nonviolent offenses are black. 17% are white. 15.7% are Latino. So there's 2 points here. One is obviously the vast disparity vis-a-vis the population that Drew pointed out in his presentation. But there's another side piece of this too, which is that there's a lot of people being put in jail, white, black, and brown. So anyway. The word crime is only associated with and used to describe something that you and I would be charged with or have the ability to carry out. But what is crime really? Flint is a crime where more than 12,000 children face permanent damage and countless adults. There's still no serious federal action being taken. And Obama, during his administration, barely lifted a finger about, the water crisis either. But while this was happening, politicians basically passed the buck to each other. Oh, this person's responsible, this person's responsible. Nobody's responsible. And nobody gets charged, really. And there's no national call to address this. Hurricane Katrina was a crime. In many ways, it was a crime because the levees did not have to break. There was, even in this society that puts no effort into maintaining any semblance of an infrastructure in 2017, and in the time, during the hurricane, there was money allocated to fix the levee every year. And every year, that local government made the decision to take that money that was used to maintain the levee and apply it to the port, which is where shipments come in, which is where they make money, rather than fixing the levee. So when the levee broke, oh my God, it happened to break on somebody in particular, but they were all gambling. Each mayor, each governor gambled with the lives of people in St. Louis. And then I want to just compare it to hurricanes in Cuba, which in hurricanes in Cuba, if you look at the map and look at like these maps that show the area of the island that the hurricane covers, it's a huge portion of the island. But every year this happens, and it happens annually, multiple times sometimes. The casualty rate is sometimes nil, and when it's not, it's low numbers, like below teens. How does this happen? Well, first of all, Cuba's a country, whether you think it's perfect or not, they made a revolution and ended capitalism in their country. It's now run more based on human needs than profit. So when a massive hurricane happens, they mobilize the whole country. They say to people like us, the first 30 blocks of Havana are about to be covered with water. Can y'all put some people up for 3 weeks? It's as simple as that. But a government who mobilizes to make that happen, that could have happened in St. Louis. That could happen in places where there's natural disasters all over the world. But it doesn't happen because the underlying reality of those systems is dog eat dog. And the underlying reality of those systems is each individual for themselves. While massive profits and resources and transportation capacities flow all around us, but are never used for our collective safety and good. The bombing of Syria is a crime. The Iraq War was a crime. The invasion of sovereign land in North Dakota, these are all crimes. Where people who were protesting and saying you don't have a right to stand on our land were sprayed with water in below freezing temperatures. That's a crime. That's a human rights abuse. And if it happened in any other country, especially if it's a developing nation, the New York Times, New York Post, Cincinnati Enquirer would all be decrying the humanity. But the U.S. organizes this. Police killing of unarmed black and brown people, these are crimes that are where there's never guilty verdicts found. The 13th Amendment in and of itself is a crime. that's the basis that allows prisoners to be treated as slaves. If you commit a crime, you can be treated as, if you're convicted of a crime, you can be enslaved. The Japanese internment camps are crimes. The funding of the violent expansion of Israeli territory, violent expansion, are crimes. Slavery was a crime, and never has there been any meaningful reparation that took place. The only thing that you could close to call a reparation that took place wasn't even given to us by the government. Working people in the South took control of governments and organized to just start getting theirs. But never has there been any government issued serious punishment or reparation of any kind for slavery. So I just wanted to go through that little list of things, and there's so many more. That list could be pages and pages and pages, but it just gets you thinking that the real crimes against humanity are never seen as such. They're not even called that. How does that affect our consciousness? Not just people in this room, but people who aren't necessarily thinking this on a profound level about the messed up things around them. Like, how does that start to affect your thinking? So I want to take a second and just talk about the commodification of crime, which is just making crime something that profit can be made from. This is an article from the Atlantic that talks about a problem that governments were facing. This is around the time where the DOJ was making its tours around the country and explaining that there was racism and explaining there was corruption, but doing absolutely nothing to respond to it. They made the point that these cities have run into problems when there are low levels of people committing crimes. And that when this happens, the state budget and the city budget, which has as a line item in the budget a presumption that they will find people guilty of crimes and charge them. That's part of the budget. Well, this asshole, what's his name? Hardesty says, now with all due respect to citizens of Nevada, talking about the fact that they lost there was a big drop in traffic violation tickets, which totally frazzled their local economy. Now, with all due respect to the citizens of Nevada, I don't think anyone is driving better. I think the truth is we're seeing less traffic violations because law enforcement's priorities have changed, and it has changed dramatically. Maybe so. But that's your mentality, that like you assume that people basically are still criminals in his eyes, but now they're just not getting caught for it. That's how they see us. Ferguson is from the DOJ report. Fort Ferguson, the level of corruption in false arrests or cooked up, trumped up crime charges against not just people in vehicles, but even just pedestrian traffic is off the charts. If you read the DOJ report, it's off the charts. So this just makes the point that it's just a further point about that. In New York City in 2002, they collected $38 million in parking fines, $380 million in parking fines, and they're looking to make $500 million in parking fines. And that's part of their budget that they must meet in order for them to do the things that they feel they need to do. And it just gives further examples of how close to $1 billion that they're talking about collecting. Now, keep in mind, in the back of your head, that while they're collecting almost $1 billion in fines, when it comes time to give money towards education or any kind of social thing, which is in the millions, not even in the hundreds of millions, in the tens of millions, they say that they don't have the money. They do have the money. It's what are they spending it on, which we'll get to. New York, there was a famous period where after somebody blew a cop away in 2014, cops in New York went on strike. And when they did that, arrests plummeted 66%. And it's funny the way this article, they call it low-level policing. Like when they basically give you tickets and cite you for violations that are petty, that they really don't have to do. Well, cops stopped doing that during this thing and made arrests go down 66%. What is considered this level of low-level policing, which in the absence of this debate with this slowdown by the cops, it never gets discussed in this fashion. It never gets discussed in this fashion. The whole package of having the cops on the street is seen as they're out there to protect you. This is for safety, blah, blah, blah. Well, what do they actually do? And what are the actual crimes that are committed? Traffic violations, which fell by 94%. Public drinking, public urination, parking violations, and nonviolent drug arrests. That's the whole kit and caboodle of what the vast majority of police rake people in and rake profits in around. It's not propaganda or rhetoric to say that cops actually create crime. Now, in the absence of this discussion, people look at you like, okay, maybe the cops are bad and they brutalize people, but create crime? Like, come on, there's crime out there and they're finding crime. They're not creating crime. No, the laws and ordinances that exist in society that are designed to catch working people. I mentioned the insurance thing. I mentioned the front license plate. There's so many different violations that you can incur that can, when you're on the streets. Jaywalking. There's so many different ways that you can get caught. And these things generate profits for capitalism at our expense. They literally create these things. They're not things that threaten society, and they're not things that in any rational society would be of interest to pursue by any kind of defense force that we as people would generate. And it's American as apple pie. So I mentioned earlier, like, what is the money being used for that's part of those millions and billions of dollars? You can't really see this, but this is just the budget in Cincinnati, which I've used before. But out of $392.9 million for the Cincinnati budget, 36.6% of that goes to police. More than a third of the budget, the whole budget, which includes education, health, recreation, parks, anything you can think about that a city would be responsible for, that is how much goes towards police. If you look at public services, which includes education and all those things wrapped into it, 4.8%. That starts to give you an idea of them employing these forces that will make them money. It's not it's not just that police are on the streets to crush worker struggles and defend the interests and prerogatives of capitalism, which I think is their underlying aim, but they are literally, in addition to that, producing the profits necessary for a city administration to function. So under those circumstances, why would they carry out anything close to justice when it comes to trying to put one of these killer cops in jail? That's their money makers. That's it.